Police and protesters have clashed in the Lebanese capital Beirut on the anniversary of a deadly explosion which destroyed huge parts of the city. Demonstrators are angry no one has been held accountable for the blast. A short distance away, a minute's silence has been held to remember the victims of the explosion. Over 200 people were killed. It's been described as one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions in history. In the United Kingdom, all 16 and 17-year-olds will be offered a Pfizer COVID vaccine in the coming weeks. Around 1.5 million teenagers could be included in the plan. The Olympic athlete from Belarus who refused her team's orders to fly home from the Games has landed in Warsaw, Poland after departing from Vienna. She's been granted a humanitarian visa.
In Malaysia, Prime Minister Muhyiddin Yassin refuses to resign even as support from political allies in parliament decreases. In Japan, lawmakers debate a policy that would keep moderately sick coronavirus patients at home in an effort to save hospital beds for serious COVID-19 cases. The United Nations humanitarian chief warns Ethiopian officials that accusations against aid workers in the country are dangerous and must stop. And U.S. President Joe Biden calls for the governor of New York to resign after an investigation found he mistreated female employees and others.
There were delays, then COVID protocols. Now Olympic athletes are dealing with a new obstacle. Some of the most extreme heat and humidity at the Olympics ever. High temperatures have already forced organizers to move several events, including the marathon. So is this something Olympic athletes are just going to have to get used to? Our Kenneth Moten reports from Tokyo.
It wouldn't be the Olympic Summer Games without the heat. But Tokyo 2020, an already unprecedented, delayed, pandemic-plagued Olympics, could be the hottest on record. Temperatures in Tokyo soaring to the mid to high 90s with about 80% humidity.
It's noon in Tokyo. Of course, I'm already feeling it. With the high humidity, it feels like 100 degrees. I don't know how the athletes do it. I just walked up the steps, and that was a lot. Whew.
From tennis to beach volleyball to track and field, and some thousands of athletes competing outside. That crushing heat, dangerous. A Russian archer fainted. A Spanish tennis player taken off the court in a wheelchair, suffering from heat stroke. Daniil Medvedev angrily telling an umpire he could finish his match, but wanted to know who would take responsibility if he died. The Russian tennis player later tweeting, still alive. Tennis great Novak Djokovic calling for a delay in the start time of matches. The International Tennis Federation agreeing to move competitions from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. in the interest of player health and welfare.
The body is very good at preventing heat stroke. It will tell you to stop. But if you're in an Olympic competition, there's a temptation not to stop.
What do you foresee as the...
Olympics officials were recently asked about heat and climate change.
We cannot reduce the risk to zero, but we can minimize the risk. The response to the climate change is a regular course of work during the Olympic Games.
It was just 3 years ago in 2018 that Japan faced a brutal heat wave, killing more than 1,000 people and tens of thousands of others sickened. The scorching heat has climate scientists sounding the alarm that these extreme temps are not just the result of a hot summer, but signs of climate change.
We know that across the globe it is warming. Some places are warming faster than others. I would say Japan and Tokyo in particular are a microcosm for global warming. In fact, if anything, they probably give us a little more of a vision into what's coming in the future because they are probably ahead of the average warming curve.
The temperature of the host city climbing 2.86 degrees Celsius since the 1900s, more than 3 times as fast as the world's average. According to Climate Central, which is a nonprofit that analyzes and reports on climate science, daily summer highs in Tokyo exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit have become all too increasingly common. The concern so grave for the Olympic Games, a study titled Rings of Fire was published by the British Association of Sustainable Sport, warning that athletes are being asked more and more to compete in environments that are becoming too hostile for the human body. And it's not just the Tokyo Olympics extreme heat raising concerns. Last year's Australian Open, players survived scorching 110-degree temps. Some saying it's time the International Olympic Committee start taking climate change into account when selecting where and when the games will be played.
in future games, we need to be very mindful of where the games are held. Look at where the climate has been. Look at where the extremes have been. And then look at how they've been changing in the very recent past so that we don't run into exceptionally hot conditions in some of the places that may be more apt to have them. Second, try not to have outdoor games or outdoor events that are during the peak heat of the day, when the sun is highest in the sky.
These satellite images show the heat island effect over Tokyo, a major urban city that is filled with concrete and very little green space.
There are places where you have a lot of heat trapping materials, things like asphalt and concrete. And so those materials help the city to heat up more than the surrounding areas during the day. And they also keep the city hotter at night. It's much harder for athletes to cool off in an urban environment, and particularly to get that cooling period they need to refresh themselves at night.
The women and men's marathons will run back-to-back this weekend with much earlier start times in the morning. The International Olympic Committee actually moved the events 3 years ago to support Japan, which is about 700 miles north of Tokyo and typically has much cooler temperatures. The IOC trying to avoid images of athletes struggling in the blistering heat.
This edition of NHK Newsline, I'm Raja Pradhan with the news from Tokyo. Authorities across Japan confirmed more than 14,000 new coronavirus infections on Wednesday, the highest daily tally ever. About 30% of them were here in Tokyo, also a record high. The spike comes as the capital remains under a fourth state of emergency and the summer games take place. Strict antivirus measures will be in effect through the end of August. The state of emergency prompted the unprecedented decision to hold the Olympics almost entirely without spectators. The uptick is putting a strain on the medical system. To prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed, the government revised its patient treatment policy. In areas hit by a surge in COVID-19 patients, those without severe symptoms will be asked to recuperate at home in principle.
We're doing all we can to protect people's health as the Delta strain of the coronavirus rapidly spreads. We decided to revise our policy so that we ensure all people can receive the necessary medical care.
But opposition parties, as well as some lawmakers within the ruling coalition, are calling on the revision to be scrapped.
If this goes ahead, people who should be hospitalized won't be able to do so. Instead, the government should ask healthcare workers across the country to better support infected people isolating in hotels.
The Prime Minister says the government has almost achieved its goal to vaccinate all willing elderly people. He says he wants to have more than 40% of the population receive 2 shots by the end of August. Tokyo and 5 other prefectures are under a state of emergency, while 5 prefectures are taking intensive antivirus measures in limited areas and periods. The government plans to expand this quasi-emergency measures to 8 other prefectures. Turning now to Thailand, where officials have reported more than 20,000 coronavirus cases, its highest ever daily count. It comes as the government extended strict measures to wider areas starting Tuesday, while it struggles to contain the highly transmissible Delta variant. The country's COVID-19 task force announced a record 20,200 cases and 188 deaths on Wednesday. The surge in patients has left hospitals overwhelmed, especially in hotspot areas, including Bangkok. With 90% of hospital beds in the capital filled, more people have been dying in their homes in recent weeks. Authorities are calling on infected people with minor or no symptoms to isolate at home so hospitals can deal with severe cases. The tougher restrictions in Bangkok and high-risk provinces include a nighttime curfew and a ban on travel between provinces first imposed in mid-July. The rules are expected to remain in place until the end of this month. Health officials are strongly urging the public to comply with infection control measures as the Delta variant is spreading more rapidly than expected. We start our Olympic update with baseball. Japan beat the game's last gold medal winner, South Korea, 5-2 in the semifinals. The matchup was one of the most awaited by baseball fans. Both squads are loaded with top professional players. Hard-fought battles are expected every time the rivals face off. On this night, Japan opened the scoring with a run in the third inning on a sacrifice fly from Sakamoto Hayato. The team scored again in the fifth on a single by Yoshida Masataka. South Korea answered back in the sixth, leveling the score at 2-2 on 4 singles. Japan broke the game open in the eighth when Yamada Tetsuto drove in 3 runners with a long fly that nearly cleared the fence. Despite the loss, South Korea is still in the tournament. If the team gets past the United States on Thursday, they'll meet Japan again in the final on Saturday. Japan is aiming for its first Olympic gold in the sport. Japan's young female skateboarders were back to winning ways on Wednesday. The women's park competition saw 2 rising stars place first and second at the end of a competition dominated by the under-20s. The host nation is streets ahead on the skate park with 5 medals, including 3 golds, with one more event still to come on Thursday. 19-year-old Yosozumi Sakura grabbed the gold, landing the highest score of the final on the first of her 3 runs. Afterwards, she said she just wanted to keep up with the other 2 Japanese gold medalists.
勝てた理由はもう本当にこの舞台で楽しんで、みんなと楽しんで、自分のベストの滑りをできたことがすごい良かったと思ってます。
12-year-old compatriot Hiraki Kokona finished second to become Japan's youngest Summer Olympic medalist. And Britain's Japan-born Sky Brown took bronze at 13, also a new age record for her country. With a Japanese mother, Brown said she felt at home and she enjoyed the games.
I'm so happy. It's insane to be here. I'm so happy to be on the podium with these guys.
And Japan's athletes didn't stop there. Kawai Yukako took gold in the women's wrestling freestyle 62-kilogram category final. She beat Kyrgyzstan's Aysulu Tinibekova by 4-3. The Kawai family could have more to celebrate on Thursday when older sister Disako goes in the final of the 57-kilo class. She won gold in 2016 at 63 kilos. Now, the women's golf competition is underway at the lush Kasumigaseki Country Club near Tokyo. Asia's recent major winners had a mixed day. U.S. Women's Open champion, Japanese-Filipino Saso Yuka, finished down the leaderboard in 47th on 3 over par. And Thailand's ANA Inspiration champion, Patti Tavatanakit, ended the day even for 23rd place. Madeleine Sagström from Sweden leads after the first round on 5 under. The International Olympic Committee has begun questioning Belarusian national team officials suspected of trying to send sprinter Kristina Tsimanouskaya back to Belarus against her will.
Further development today is that the IOC is opening a disciplinary commission to establish the facts in this case.
Adams also said the IOC had received a written report from Belarus's National Olympic Committee. Tsimanouskaya left Japan on Wednesday morning. The 24-year-old sought asylum in Europe after competing at the Tokyo Olympics. Poland has granted Tsimanouskaya a humanitarian visa. The country borders Belarus. The sprinter said her coaches tried to forcibly send her home after she complained on social media about being ordered to run in an event she hadn't been scheduled for. She also said her comments were seen as critical of the Belarusian government, but were never meant to be political. Media in Belarus suggest President Alexander Lukashenko called for her to return home early from the Tokyo Games. Local journalists and political commentators believe Lukashenko is likely to take a tough stance against athletes who failed to achieve good results at the Tokyo Games, and he regards the Olympics as an opportunity to enhance national prestige.